Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 30th of August of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, we have changes on the ground, so let's start. And before we start, I would like to share with you one of the most important, important piece of news that we received during the previous 24 hours, and according to information we have, European Union defense ministers failed to agree on lifting restrictions on Western weapons as strikes on Russian territory. European Union countries left decision on restrictions on these strikes to the countries of the Union. There will be no pan-European decision. This is very important decision and very important statement. We've started from this topic for a reason. And let's keep this information in our minds. And now let's talk about Ukraine, and later we will use this information once again. So now let's talk about the changes on the ground. And of course, first we're going to talk about the South Donetsk direction. If you remember, just yesterday we were talking that the Russians began offensive according to Deep State to the west of Pavlovka, and currently we haven't received anything about this operation, as well as we haven't received anything about further Russian progress to the city of Ugledar itself. The only updates were coming from the area in the vicinity of Vadiane. According to pro-Russian sources, the Russians managed to improve their positions to the east of the village, and if we return back on map, currently according to pro-Russian sources, the Russians control something like this. So everything that colored is a gray zone is a contested area, and this additional red cloud. So as you can see, the Russians got very close to the village itself, and the Russians continue semi-encirclement of the village with the purpose then to attack and to force the Ukrainians to fall back. So obviously the battle for Ugledar is going to start with the village of Vadiane and the coal mines and the industrial zones around. So if the Russians are able to take under control, this is going to be the successful complete of the first stage of the battle for Ugledar. Now let's talk about the Kostyantynivka. As you can see, we have adjusted the map in Russian favor. We got two videos from this area. In the first video, we can see how the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions inside of the association Shakhtar, Garden Association of Shakhtar, and we see significant Russian artillery strikes, significant number of aviation strikes, and most likely we can see the beginning of storm operation, of assault operation. This is something like artillery preparation before everything began. And right after this video we got another update from pro-Ukrainian sources, and in this video we can see how the Ukrainians were FPV droning the Russian soldiers who were already on the territory of this Shakhtar small settlement. So based on these two videos we have adjusted the map in Russian favor. So obviously the battle for Kostyantynivka has ended. Furthermore, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation confirmed that as a result of clashes during the previous weeks, so starting from 24th till 30th of August, the Russians managed to establish complete control over Kostyantynivka as well. So no doubts that the territory is under complete Russian control, and the Russians are moving further in the direction of Katerinovka and Antonovka. Now let's move to the most important and the most interesting direction. We are going to talk about Pokrovsk, the Pokrovsk-Selidova area. And today we got very interesting updates. More precisely, we have very interesting complete absence of any updates from the city of Selidova. From this area we have just one video, one geolocation that's dated on the 29th of August of 2024, and the video was published by pro-Ukrainian sources. And in this video we can see the Ukrainian journalists who were making video right in the central part of Selidova, stating that everything is under control, that no doubts Ukrainians controlled at least this part of the city, and many other things. And as for the 30th of August, as you can see, during the day we haven't received anything. And some pro-Russian, I would like to point your attention, pro-Russian sources stated that maybe yesterday when every single source was drawing maps and arrows and polygons on map, was making this based on the speculations and wishful thinkings. So the Russians, the pro-Russian source, are saying that maybe the Russian sources were too fast and too fast when changing the colors of map. So the Russians are trying to say that maybe this control that we have already added on map as a contested area is not something that is happening right now in this direction. maybe the Russians control less territories and much closer to the coal mine and the landfill of Russia. So these are the statements of some very reliable pro-Russian sources. Anyway, let's wait for additional updates, but if you ask my opinion, I think that there are very heavy clashes right now inside of the city of Selidova, and the Russians haven't stopped their offensive, and most likely the Russians captured everything we have colored as contested area. The thing is that currently and during the previous 24 hours, the Russians were focused on completely different goals and completely different objectives. The main purpose of the Russians during the previous 24 hours was to establish complete control over the M30 road that goes from Selidova to Peskhy to Donetsk, with the purpose to improve their logistic, as we discussed in the previous video. If you remember, during the previous video we were talking about the distance that the Russians required to supply their force in Selidova if they begin their support in Avdiivka, and if the Russians were moving through all these villages, Avdiivka till Novosilovka Persha, then to Selidova. It takes around 43 kilometers to bring additional forces and reinforcements to the city of Selidova. But if the Russians use the road between Peskhy, Pervomayska, Netailova, then to Karlovka, then through Karlovka to Memrik, then the distance is 23 kilometers. So this was the main purpose of the Russians during the previous 24 hours, to reduce logistic and to improve their positions. Now let's talk in details. During the previous 24 hours, we got a lot of geolocations from the city of Karlovka itself. And this is the first geolocation. And in this video, we can see how the Russians managed to establish complete control over some base, over some public camp that located on the shore of the Karlovka water reservoir. And this is the first geolocation that we received during the previous 24 hours from Karlovka. And based on this geolocation, we have adjusted the map and added a small area between, let's say, in the north of Karlovka water reservoir and to the south. Later we got additional geolocation from the western part of Karlovka, and in this video we can see the date. First of all, this is the 30th of August, as you can see, and in this video we can see the Russian drone that was flying above this part of Karlovka. Then we can see a Russian soldier who was waving with the Ukrainian flag, and he was moving freely along the streets between buildings without being scared of being attacked by Ukrainian FPV drones or something like this. And this video confirms not just control, but the most important, the strong control over this territory. The Russians raised the flag. Of course, the place was immediately geolocated, and the Russian soldier established his flag right exactly in this point. So no doubts, maybe plus minus a few meters, few centimeters, but exactly in this area. And based on this video, we have adjusted, and most of the mappers have adjusted their maps. And right before we start making the video, we got another geolocation from from this church that located between these two previous geolocations. Another video, as you can see, a church in the city of Karlovka and a Russian flag above it. The most important thing I would like to point your attention that, as you can see, the church wasn't almost damaged during the battle for this foothold and for the village of Karlovka. And that's it. So based on this video, we have adjusted the map. The Russians 100% sure managed to restore control over the main supply road, and obviously starting off tomorrow, the Russians will increase, intensify their pressure in the city of Selidova, and now the real battle, the real clashes for this territory is going to start. Now let's talk about reports that we also received during the previous 24 hours, but that wasn't confirmed by any geolocation. And these reports are coming from the village of Galitsynivka. According to some pro-Russian sources, the village was captured. Not the entire village, but the northern part of the village that located to the north of the river by the name of Vovcha. So let's add this river on map. This will allow you to understand the current positions of the armed forces of Ukraine. So this is the river of Vovcha. As you can see, it goes like a snake, and so everything that located to the north of this blue line is already captured by the Russians. So this part of Galitsynivka was captured. So of course I don't think, and I have doubts, that Ukrainians are going to hold the southern part of Galitsynivka, because if they continue staying there and continue holding their positions in this part, most likely they would be encircled by the Russians due to big problems with supply and support and logistic. So I believe that during the next 24 hours, the Ukrainians will fall back from Galitsynivka towards the city of Kupyansk, or towards the city of Girnik. And most likely the Ukrainians will try to hold their positions between these two cities, Kursk and Girnik. So the next defense belt of the armored forces of Ukraine, where they will try to slow down the Russians, goes through the cities of Selidova, the city of Ukrainsk, and the city of Girnik. So this is the defense belt that the Ukrainians are going to hold as long as possible until they find the solution how to stabilize the situation and how to break everything, at least in not maybe in Ukraine's favor, but at least to reduce the Russian initiative and let's say everything they have. Let's talk about another important things from the same area. During the previous 24 hours, we got additional batch from the Death Road. As you know, the Russians moved their FPV drone activity further in the southern direction. They have created another Death Road, and during the previous 24 hours, we got significant number of geolocations and videos of how the Russians were FPV droning the Ukrainian forces. And as you can see, the videos are publishing by the same FPV drone operators group. It's Sudoplatov. So as I understand, we can start counting thousands of vehicles that have been destroyed by the Russians since the beginning of Avdiivka operation, just on the Pokrovsk, on the Avdiivka areas. So the clashes continues, but once again, as for the previous 24 hours, just for one day, just for a few hours, the Russian progress further in the southwestern direction were slowed down or stopped. But the Russians improved their positions in this artillery pocket between Karlovka and Krasnogorovka. And once again, according to Western analytics and Western journalists, most likely the Ukrainians during the next 48 hours will abandon every single square kilometer exactly from these fields. And this is also very good progress for the Russians, because they will be able to maintain the line of combat contact and just to reduce, to shortage the lines and to release additional forces that can be used for further offensive in Zaryan, in Selidova itself. Now let's move to Novohrodivka. As you can see, we still haven't colored the entire city. Today we have two geolocations from this area. The first one in the northern part of the city. In this video we can see the Russian flag that was raised above the coal mine, and which confirms complete control over the territory. Obviously we have no doubts about this, and the Russian control over the landfill in the same area. And this later, also somewhere during the day, right before we start making the video, we got another geolocation from the most southwestern part of the city. And in this video we can see Russian soldiers who were clearing the area, were moving from one building to another, and Ukrainian FPV drone operators, the most important of 47th Mechanized Brigade, were bombing and attacking the Russian forces there. So of course we still, despite numerous numbers of speculations and talks and reports that the entire Novohrodivka was already captured by the Russians, we still haven't received even a single geolocation exactly from these endless number of contested areas that were captured according to different mappers, reliable mappers. We have no doubts that the entire Novohrodivka was captured, but we are just following some logic, and we would like to change the colors of map in someone's favor just based on geolocations. So this is the situation here. And now let's return back to the statement of the European Union regarding the authorizations of for Ukraine to attack the territory of Russia, and this important video. Once again, this video, as you can see, was published by 47th Mechanized Brigade. This is very important because when the battle for the Pokrovsk direction just started, we got report. It was took place 2, 3, or 4 weeks ago that the 47th Mechanized Brigade of Armored Forces of Ukraine lost its combat capabilities and was removed from the line of combat contact to restore its forces in its power, its combat capability. And later we got another report from the city, probably a few days after we got that first report about the combat capabilities. We got a very interesting piece of news from the city of Glushkov, and in this video we can see the Iskander strike, and the author and the Russians reported that in this video we can see Iskander strike on the headquarters of the 47th Mechanized Brigade. And if you remember, we were talking that Ukrainians, by saying that this or that brigade lost its combat capabilities, try to remove secretly and silently this or that unit from the line of combat contact and to move in the necessary direction. And we made the conclusion that Ukrainians have redeployed the forces of 47th Brigade to the north northern Ukrainian direction to the city of Sumy in the Kursk direction with the purpose to begin offensive towards the city of Rylsk, Korineva, Glushkova, and maybe even the Kursk power plant. And maybe this is exactly what was happening during August. And now we got report that European countries haven't lifted the restrictions on these strikes on deep inside of the territory of Russian Federation, and that means that Ukrainians are no longer have any, let's say, meanings, any importance, any value, and anything to continue offensive, because you can't attack Kursk, you can't attack towards the village or towards the nuclear power plant if you can't attack the Russian forces that are located behind the Kursk power plant somewhere here, because according to the European Union and the Western countries classification, this is already deep inside of the territory of Russian Federation, and the Ukrainians are not authorized to attack Russian positions, let's say, in this red cloud. It's like just a example. Softly we have added this icon, this cloud softly, but just to understand what is going on. So of course, without this authorization to attack Russian reserves, logistic, the Ukrainians have no chances, zero chances to continue offensive, because they would be destroyed without this support. And the Ukrainians have been waiting for this authorization for 4 weeks of the Kursk offensive. But today, as we can see, the European Union haven't lifted these restrictions. And now I understand that Ukrainians realized that there are going to be no lifting of these restrictions, and they began redeployment of their forces back to the Pokrovsk direction. And the first brigade that was redeployed back to the Pokrovsk direction is the forces of 47th Mechanized Brigade. So let's wait for additional updates, because if this brigade did return to this area, most likely we're going to start receiving more and more updates, more and more FPV drone attacks and artillery strikes and so on. So this is the situation. So the Ukrainians realized the risk of losing Pokrovsk and realized no value of the Kursk offensive, and now they try to restore everything and to stabilize the line of combat attack. The question is, the thing is, whether the Ukrainians now have enough of time to finish this. I think they don't have enough of time, because they have already passed the turning point, and now the situation is going to be more and more difficult. Now let's move further and let's talk about additional geolocations. The Ukrainian sources published the video how they were bombing the Russian forces in Grodovka, and based on this video we have adjusted the map a little bit in Russian favor. There were a few episodes of how Ukrainians were bombing the Russians in this building, so just small changes on the ground. Now let's move further and let's talk about Toretsk, New York agglomeration. During the previous 24 hours, we haven't received lots of updates. The most important things are coming from the line of New York further to the west in the direction of Valentinovka, Panteleimonovka, and Alexandropol. There was a very big and long operational pause. The Russians most likely were dealing with the cauldrons of armored forces of Ukraine inside of New York and between these water reservoirs. Maybe the Russians managed to fix all issues, or maybe they managed to cross this turning point when they realized that Ukrainians are no longer able to escape the complete destroying these cauldrons or something like this, because the Russians began moving further in the western direction. They managed to capture additional 3 lines between the two territories, and the Russians began very powerful artillery bombardments of the city of Alexandropol, and the most important, the strongholds and the fortifications around. Maybe during the next few days we're going to see additional Russian attempt to storm the territory with the purpose to capture Alexandropol completely, and then to move further to the north along the main supply roads. As for Chasiv Yar, nothing special, just regular Russian activity. The Russians are bombing the Chasiv Yar citadel that is located in the central, it's already the western part of the city. Lots of FAPs, lots of explosions. We don't know the exact status of the central part. We don't know the exact status of the area along Seversky Donetsk Donbass canal. We have some changes on the map according to different mappers, but there is the silence from this area is too long, is already taking place for too long. So maybe at some point during the next few days the Russians will announce that they managed to secure completely the central part of Chasiv Yar. Maybe the situation is so bad for the Ukrainians there, so nobody is let's say publishing the real situation on the ground, neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians. Now let's move further. Let's talk about the Kupyansk direction. The Russians managed to improve their positions along the river of Zheribets. They captured additional 3 lines in the fortifications and just got for another few square kilometers closer to the cities and the villages along Zhiribets River. And this is specific and very interesting direction because the Russians, as I see, have no limits on the use of artillery strikes and FPV drone strikes, because the progress and the movements of Russian forces completely supported by a endless number of artillery shells the Russians are using in this direction. So we just seen another episodes of how the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainians, and then how they were let's say, capturing completely empty positions of the armed forces of Ukraine. Now let's move to the north in Kupyansk direction. We got very important updates from the city of Sinkovka. If you remember, just yesterday we were talking about this video. The Russian sources published the video how they raised the flag in the central part of the village, and based on this video most of the mappers have adjusted their maps in of course in Russian favor. But today the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the village of Sinkovka, and they managed to secure this territory. So based on this report, based on this video, based on the report of the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, we have adjusted the map in Russian favor, and we have colored the entire Sinkovka under complete Russian control. So this is the situation. Of course, there is still a lot of job to do, but now the Russians began the battle and the clashes for the village of Petropavlovka, and if the Russians are able to take under control this village, then the battle for Kupyansk is going to start. But if we consider the number of days and months the Russians spent to fight for Sinkovka, it's very difficult to make any projections regarding the battle of Petropavlovka. Kharkiv, the Russians were bombing and attacking the city very heavily. Today, a lot of FABs, lots of missiles arrived in the city, a lot of buildings in the residential area were damaged, yet we haven't received any updates regarding the Russian results, what were they attacking, or it was just the work of Ukraine air defense, because some source reported that in this video we can see the results not of Russian strikes but the results of Ukraine failed air defense or something like this. So let's wait for additional details. As for the Kursk direction, once again, according to information we have and according to geolocations, according to everything we've been receiving for the previous week, we see that the Ukraine offensive was stopped completely. And it's of course according to pro-Russian sources. It's the Russians who are saying that everything was stabilized, the Ukrainians were completely defeated, the Ukrainians have already lost 10 billions of soldiers and so on, and now the Ukrainians are running away and there are a lot of prisoners of war and many other different things. But on the other hand, as we discussed, the Ukrainians basically wasn't authorized to use Western weapon to move further deep inside of the territory of Russia. So two versions, it's up to you who to believe. I believe that everything is the combination of both, let's say, theories. Either the Ukrainians lost their possibilities to move further due to the restrictions, and from on the other side, during the time while the Ukrainians were waiting, the Russians of course deal significant and critical damage to Ukrainian manpower and vehicles, and now the Ukrainians also due to this fact are no longer available to move further. So summarize everything, we understand that Ukrainians have just one option: to dig in deeper, as deep as possible, and to hold these territories until they are able to stabilize the situation in the Pokrovsk direction. And the second thing, they began moving more and more forces back to the Pokrovsk with the purpose not to allow the Russians to capture the city of Pokrovsk without any resistance. Most likely the Russians would be able to capture Selidova and everything almost until Kurakhov, maybe Kurakhov itself, maybe even Kurakhov would be captured much faster than Pokrovsk itself. But for the Pokrovsk, the Russians would be forced to fight, and this is going to be very bloody and very heavy clashes that most likely will take place maybe during this upcoming autumn or the early winter. I'm not sure that the Russians are able to capture during autumn Pokrovsk, because the Ukrainians will not allow this. Of course, they think that they will not, but who knows what is going to be next. Maybe the Russians will see no resistance until Dnipro River. So we will find this out obviously very soon. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.